when you think in terms of doctrinal lessons, what do you think of? Epistemology? Eschatology? Do you think of the profound doctrine of atonement? The words such as propitiation come to our minds. Well, what about those first 3 chapters of Ephesians where Paul talks about the foreknowledge of God and uses words such as predestination? Doctrinal lessons, doctrinal preaching. What is that? In Titus, the first chapter, Titus is told by the Apostle Paul that elders are to be men that by sound doctrine can answer the gainsayer. And then in the second chapter of Titus, we have our word again in chapter 2 and verse 1, where Titus is told to speak the things that become or are proper for sound doctrine. And what he goes on to say is that older men be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith, in love, and patience. So you see, churches that are preaching sound doctrine are preaching how that older men should behave themselves. That's sound doctrine. And verse 3, the older women likewise. This is sound doctrine. When Paul told Timothy and Titus here in this letter, both of these men who are evangelists, so much is said about doctrine, I want us to see what is in the context of Titus chapter 2. This is doctrine. This is sound doctrine. Verse 3, that older women likewise, that they be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. And so this is sound doctrine, and churches that are preaching doctrinal sermons will include teaching on how older women, verse 3, are to conduct themselves and what they are to teach younger women. I've selected this passage this morning, actually the 2 verses in particular, verse 4 and 5 of chapter Titus 2, to be the text for our lesson this morning. And it is a lesson that's in the context this month of our talking about home and family. And what we've tried to do is to have somewhat of a logical approach to this from the standpoint of starting with what is foundational. And I believe it is foundational to talk about having Christ in the home. That's the foundation of everything. And we looked at that in Colossians 3. And the kind of love described in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love that never fails. We talked about how that kind of love must be in the home. And then this past Sunday morning, I talked about just the topic of preparing for marriage. And I made the point in the beginning that whether you are very young, the youngest ones here, and the youngest ones that can understand that are not yet married, or if you're the oldest ones here and have been married the longest, the lesson is for you. Because you can take these passages that we looked at and make application. If you're married, make your marriage better, make it stronger. But we made an special appeal, though, to those that are not married to do those things that prepare for the kind of home that God wants us to have. The kind of godly home that we read about in the Scripture doesn't just happen. And it is something that on purpose, with deliberation, the wise woman builds her house. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 1 says, the worthy woman is one that fears the Lord, and she looks well to the ways of her household. These are things that are important and show the home is a matter of purpose and design, but it's also a matter of purpose and design in the preparation time. So we talked about what are you attracted to? What are you looking for? And to be candid, we saw that a lot of times what people look for in a date is more of the kind of thing of fun and a good time and looking at outward things. But now when it comes to marriage, that's going to be different. And yet it won't be different if we're not during that courtship time looking for the right things. I think all of you that are, and we're blessed, aren't we blessed to have so many young people here that are not yet married? And I think every one of you, if I were to ask you the question, do you want to have a happy home? Do you want to be a faithful Christian and have a Christ-centered home? I don't expect anybody would say, no, I don't want that. I think everybody that would say he wants a home at all would say, yes, that's what I want. And the thing about it is that you need to know, you guys that are up here, girls and guys that are up front, boys and girls, you're listening, I know you are, but your attitude that is being shaped right now, and your priorities that are being shaped now, and that day to day, when you make choices, right and wrong, each day, if you're 15 years old right now, you're making important choices. If you're 16, 17, you're transitioning into a young adult. And so you won't have in that 5 or 6 years from now, your dreams won't come true by accident. It'll only be if you're following the course that is set forth in God's Word. You can tell this is important to God. God cares about our homes. And so many passages from the beginning in Genesis 2, when God created Adam and Eve and made them one flesh, and all the way through the Scriptures, that's a matter of importance to God. And so, as I say, here's an evangelist named Titus. And he is in an island called Crete. And he is there to preach the gospel. He's there to set in order the things that are lacking and to ordain elders, chapter 1 says, in every city. That is, in every city where there was a congregation of God's people. And so that's what he's to do. And Paul is telling him about his work that pertains not only to the ordination and appointment of elders, but just the teaching of the people that he is to do. And so many things that could be said about the topic of the home. When I think in terms of the role of mothers and fathers and children, husbands, wives, and children, again, here's a passage that really gets to the heart of it, and that's what I want to look at with you this morning. Let's read the text again, and this time I want to read in the King James translation. The King James. The text says in Titus 2 and verse 4, that they may teach the young women to be sober. And then it continues, to love their husbands, to love their children. You know, when I looked at that, I had to take a second look at that they may teach them to be sober, because later on in the verse that follows, in verse 5, the word is found there again, that they are to be sober. The word discreet there is sober. And so there's a special word for that. It's included in the listing. So is he saying it twice? And really he's not. Again, that they may encourage the young women, the New King James says, and likewise the New American Standard. And other translations, that they may admonish the young women, is actually the New King James, and that they may encourage the young women, Christian Standard, New American Standard, and so forth. But the King James, in saying that they may teach the young women to be sober, they're using several words to translate one verb, and that is to teach to be sober. The word there, which is translated variously, train, teach, encourage, means to recall to one's senses, to admonish, to encourage, to advise, to bring to one's senses. In fact, I was looking at my King James translation, and I had not noticed before the little footnote in verse 4, when it says that they may teach the young women to be sober. The footnote for that word sober is responsible. Responsible. You know, it's possible to be immature for a long time. And in our society, a person can be an adolescent and just perpetually be an adolescent. I mean, I know that he's in his 20s. I know she's in her 30s, but still acting like an adolescent. And so the first thing that heads the list is to teach to bring to their senses, to teach them to be responsible. I just want you to see that's part of sometimes it takes more than one English word to translate a single Greek word, and that's what you have here. So are you with me? The word teach, train, encourage, it is a word that means to teach one to be responsible. It's a word that it's a part of it is the mind, and it's to bring to one's senses. And so that's the thing that heads the list then when he talks about those things that are to be itemized. Are you with me? Okay. So we continue then. The text says to love their husbands. Admonish the young women. Bring them to their senses. Remind them of their responsibility to love their husbands. Now, I know what we think when we're young. The husband thinks, of course I'll be a good husband. I don't need someone to teach me to be a good husband. Of course I know how to be a good husband. You know, you'd almost be insulted to think that someone would need to teach you how to be a good husband. Of course you know that. But we don't. We have to learn. And here, it's not for nothing. It's not filler when older women are to teach the younger women to love their husbands. And so here's a great resource. It's not an insult to here be in the category of an older woman. This is simply a matter of reality. You have the younger one that would either not be married or have young, small children. And then those that are older, they rear their children. And they have a life of experience that they can impart. And instead of there being some kind of generational gap, Paul is seeing sisters working together and helping one another. And this relationship that flows naturally so that older women are here having an important role. And it could be done in several ways. It could be done in a class situation. Sometimes we have a ladies' class that could address that. It can be done informally. But the point is, it needs to be done. That's a great resource to be utilized to teach them to love their husbands. The word love their husbands here is not your regular word for love, which is agape love. It's another word. It is the word that has to do with friendship, fondness. And A.T. Robertson translates this as being fond of her husband. The idea is warm affection. And so here again, obviously we should love one another even to the extent that Jesus says, love your enemies. So there's unconditional love, that high and noble love. God so loved the world, but there's a special love that's in marital love. And it's a wise older woman that is teaching a younger woman to make sure that she loves her husband. That Paul would say in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 that one render due benevolence. That in marriage, that the husband-wife relationship is a wholesome thing. It is God approved in Hebrews 13 and verse 4. Let marriage be honorable among all, and the bed undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God shall judge. It's right for us to teach what's wrong. And in this series of lessons, we've addressed some things that are wrong. But this passage is talking about teaching what is right. And what God has done is not dirty. What God has done is not something repulsive. What God has done is dignified. It is appropriate. It has His blessing upon it. And so this is the thing that should be encouraged, that older women teach the younger women. Bring them to their sense of responsibility to love your husbands. Don't neglect that. Don't let other things crowd in. Make sure that it's a priority that's so important. And so to love your husband. And of course, that includes a lot of things. But as we've seen in Proverbs 12 and verse 4, the loving wife is a blessing to her husband. It's a blessing from God. And so that's the matter that begins this list, this should be a priority. Love your husbands. Do those things that build your marriage. As we said last Sunday night, put a hedge about it. Love your marriage enough to protect it from those things that would have a destructive impact. Love your husband. Second thing the text says is to love your children, to teach them to love their children. Now here again, that would, as we borrow from today, that would seem almost to be a no-brainer. Well, of course I'll love my children. But we need to be taught to love our children. And by the way, it's not an assumption that everyone has love of their children. There are some people in Romans chapter 1 that don't have natural affection. That word is found twice in the Bible, in Romans chapter 1 and 2 Timothy chapter 3, where some are without natural affection. And you see that in these horror stories on the news, when someone terribly abuses a child, or someone neglects a child. And you say, how in the world could a parent do that to their own children? Well, it's because they were without natural affection. It's because they either were not taught to love their children, or they refused and were disobedient to the teaching that they had to love your children. Now, that's something that, it kind of depends on, I guess, your situation, maybe your individual makeup, but sometimes younger mothers can really encourage, can really use that kind of encouragement to love your children. I think oftentimes, I have such pleasant memories back when Alicia was a baby. But at church time, that was her nap time, and she didn't, it just didn't work out well for her. And, she cried a lot, just to be honest. Now, I'm not bringing this up, to embarrass anybody. But she cried a lot, and we were in a small congregation, and the only baby there. She was the only baby there. And after services, this is the kind of encouragement the older women would give the younger woman, my wife. What's wrong with her? When mine were little like that, I'd take them out and wear them out, and they didn't do that anymore. And, just one time, and I thought, wow, do you expect me to believe that? Is that really what you want me to think? Oh, my children never did that. So I was benevolent. I thought, well, maybe enough time has passed. With the passing of years, you've sort of forgotten what it was like. But I'm not trying to embarrass Linda either. But I'll tell you, during those early years of our preaching, there were times she went home crying. And she did not feel the encouragement of older women toward younger women that's in this passage. Without meaning to, we can say some things that are very thoughtless and things that are very hurtful. You know what would be a lot better? I'm so glad you're here. You've got your baby girl or your baby boy just exactly where they need to be. Now, that doesn't mean that if one's crying, you should just let it cry. We didn't do that. She would take it to our nursery, which was the bathroom of this old house that we were meeting in. And she would sit on the side of the bathtub. That was what she would sit in. So I'm not saying that a child should be disruptive. We have nurseries here. And so don't let it reach the point, if you can't tend to it, that it just keeps crying. We're not saying that. But I'll tell you what's sad is a church where you don't hear any crying babies. There's a name for that. It's called a dying church. And I'm so glad, even as we said Wednesday night, we have such hope for the future here. But to encourage the women, the younger women, to love their children. And of course, you show love for your children, especially when you're setting the right example, when it's a Deuteronomy 6 kind of thing where the word is in your heart and you're teaching them when you lie down and when you rise up, when you're sitting in the house, when you're walking in the way. When you're loving the Lord with all your heart, that's how you love your children. When you choose yourself the one thing that's needful and you're encouraging them to make those kinds of priorities, you're loving your children. Children are natural imitators. And incidentally, we can say the things of the Lord are most important, but they see what we get the most excited about. They see what we're the most invested in. And if, the things of the Lord are the most important, but what we really get excited about is hobbies or sports or recreation. Now that really, you really see us come to life on that. But now the things of the Lord, that's what's really more important. The text continues. To teach, to train, to bring them to their sense of responsibility, to be discreet. And this is what I was saying a while ago. This is a form of the word that was in the verb form a while ago to call to the senses. Well, this is now the adjective, to be discreet. And so it's the same word except a different form. But it means what we said to start with, to be sober, to to be responsible. It means to be self-controlled. The New American Standard says to be sensible. Not everybody exercises good sense. I'm not talking now about IQ. I'm not talking about intelligence. But the sensible here is when we're using our mind, when we're being sensible, when we're being sober, when we're being responsible, when we're being mature. I said last week, marriage is not for babies. It's not for immature people. And if you're not looking for a girl or a boy, young people, that is sensible, and then you wake up married to somebody that basically bounces off the wall and is irresponsible, you're in for a lot of heartache. Sensible. This, again, is, you find the word a lot. It's required of elders, Titus 1:8, older men, Titus 2, verse 2, older women, Titus 2 and verse 3. It's just it's one of those things that's required of all of us, to be sensible, to be wise, to be careful, clear thinking, emotional stability. These things can be taught. They can be learned. They can be practiced. And if you say, well, that's not a strong point, well, work on that. Cultivate that so that there's a growth that is taking place. Next word is the word chaste. New American Standard says pure. Now, that doesn't mean nobody else is teaching about that. Elders are teaching this. Preachers are teaching this. Bible class teachers. But what the text is saying is that older women are to teach the younger women to be chaste, to be pure. So what that means is this younger person might not, on his or her own, she might not be showing the kind of maturity yet and have left some things behind from adolescence or just immaturity, but you're older. You know better. So what that means is when she uses social media and posts something in dress that's inappropriate, don't you say, oh, how cute. And don't you click like on that. Because as an older woman, you're not encouraging her to be pure and chaste when you sanction immodest dress. And by immodest dress, I mean what is inappropriate to be seen by the public, wherever you're in the public. That means if you're twirling a baton, it's not wrong to twirl a baton. But if you're wearing an immodest outfit while you're doing that, there's the rub. It's not wrong to dribble a basketball. But if you're wearing clothing that is immodest, that doesn't square with what this says. Teach them to be pure. That means purity in heart. It means purity in thought. It means purity in dress. It means purity in conduct. It means purity in our words. That's why this past Sunday night, we were warning about this so-called, flirting kind of stuff. Well, we didn't mean anything by it. We were just teasing. Everybody knew it was in fun. Put a hedge about your marriage. Love it enough to protect it. That's not pure. That's not chaste. And what ends up in adultery starts a lot of times with that flirting that never should have gotten started. Are God's people losing the battle about immodesty, by the way? About dress? Over the years, there's been a lot of teaching on that. But it just seems that there's a perpetual problem with people not getting it. I'll tell you something that I appreciate. I've done several meetings up in the state of Maine, more than one congregation. Years ago, I don't even remember what year, and I'm not sure if Linda was with me on this one. She may or not remember when I tell this. She's been with me for several, but not all of them. But there was a new convert. And this lady had a background that she was ungodly in her background. She had not been taught. But now she learned the gospel. Now she came to the Lord. And what I was told by the local preacher there was that she met with the ladies, his wife and others that were older than she, the new convert. And she said, I would like for you to come to my home, and I want you to look in my closet, and I want you to help me, and I want you to go through the dresses that are in my closet. And if there's something that does not reflect women professing godliness, I want us to take that to the side and move it, and I'm going to get rid of that. I've never heard of anybody doing that before, but she did that, and the ladies did that. She knew she needed help, and they went through and, well, this is too revealing. This is too tight. This is not, as to borrow from 1 Timothy 2, this is not proper for women professing godliness. And instead of bristling about it, she's the one that took the initiative. Would you help me with this? And they went through her closet, and I don't know that I have a count of how many things, but they got rid of some things, anything and she accepted that. Wasn't that a wonderful attitude? And that was, you see, in keeping with the spirit of this passage, where a younger person, and in her case a new convert, just saw the need for godly women to help her, and they did, and she submitted to those biblical principles. That's not a story that I hear every day, by the way. But that's so important. Teach them to be pure. And young ladies and younger women, for you to determine, you will always be pure. You will be pure before marriage, and you will keep yourself pure in marriage. All that's so important. But the text continues. It says, workers at home. Some translations, I think, say homemakers. And we understand what that means. Again, the wise woman builds her house. The worthy woman of Proverbs 31 looks well to the ways of her household. This is someone that, well, she manages her home well. The idea is that the attention is concentrated on her home, on her family. It's not the idea, well, she does that too, but now she's really about, this is her profession, this is her occupation, but she also has a home. That's getting the cart before the horse. It may be, and I've quoted this a number of times because it impressed me so much, like Bill Hall said to our young men a few years ago at leadership camp, guys the age just like of these boys sitting right up here. He said, young men, when you marry, your wives may or may not work outside the home. But regardless of that, it's your job to support your family. And that's part of taking the role of leadership, and being the man is that you're providing for your household. But we read in the Bible, Lydia was a seller of purple. And yet, look how she extends hospitality. And Luke writes about this in Acts 16. When she was converted, she said to Paul and his travelers, there were 4 of them, Luke, Paul, Timothy, and Silas, and she said, if you judge me to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house. And Luke says she constrained us. And so we understand that she was providing income for herself if she was a seller of purple. But she had a house, a household, and she's extending hospitality. She's looking well to the ways of her household. I think in terms of Aquila and Priscilla, that husband-wife team were tent makers. They worked together. And yet we read about the church that was meeting in their house. And so, homemakers, I despise what Satan has done in the minds of so many people. I was not eavesdropping. You know, sometimes you're just in a situation you have to be in the same spot, same location. But this woman from Canada, this Canadian woman from Canada, she had a group of students. And they were doing some Greek islands. And I happened to be on the same motor coach that she was on, just for a very short time, I'm thankful to say. But she says, you know, one of my students, she was a teacher, she said one of my students was saying that what she wanted to do in life, she wanted to marry, and she wanted to have children. She wanted to have a home. And she said, I told her, you can do better than that. And that's the ways, you mean that's all you're going to do? And so women that are godly women that look well to the ways of their household, they're just second rate. They must be, you know, the 1 talent people, because the 2 talent and 5 talent people, well, they can just do it all. And we know that's the way the world looks at it. I think I told you before about, I believe it's Marshall Patton. It could have been his brother Herschel, but he was applying for a loan. And occupation of your wife. And the woman was asking questions and filling some stuff in. And so she says, what does your wife do? And he says, she is a homemaker. And he looked down, he could read upside down, and she was writing that, and the person wrote, unskilled. And Brother Patton said, wait a minute now. He said, she is very skilled at what she does. She's not unskilled. But that's the way the world looks at it. But I want to tell you, like I read last Sunday night from Psalm 128, this woman's in the heart and center of your home. And she's so important. Boys and girls, rise up and call her blessed. And the husband as well. Let him honor her, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, as being joint heirs also of the grace of life. The world is not going to honor our godly wives and mothers. Television doesn't honor our godly wives and mothers. It's up to us men and children to do the right thing about that. Well, then the text says kind. To be taught to be kind. Now, some translations say good, depending on your translation. I noticed the NIV and New American Standard, I checked with several, they have the word kind. And that also reminds me of the worthy woman. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the law of kindness is on her tongue. Kindness. William Barclay, in his commentary, made the point that it would, especially in the biblical world, it would really be hard on women when you think about what all they had to do. In my travels to the Bible lands, you can still see grindstones. You know, Jesus talked about 2 women shall be grinding wheat. I've seen grindstones that were just like that. They would have a hole with a handle on each side, and so you got to grind your flour. But then you've got to bake it in an oven, and washing of the clothes, and nursing the children. And all the things were so labor intensive and so tiring and time consuming and ongoing. It would be easy to let some of that really get you kind of irritated and short-tempered, and just the nature of the work that is being done. To be kind, to not bite the heads off of your family. You know, that sometimes situations will make you irritable. Don't take it out on your family. To be kind. That's a good trait to be taught. Because sometimes when there's not kindness, what happens next? Angry words. And we sing, angry words, oh, let them never from the tongue unbridled slip. Because what happens when those angry words come out because you're irritated? Well, it hurts, and it hurts deeply. And so you can say, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But the hurt doesn't immediately go away. Teach them to be kind. And the last thing it mentions is to be obedient to their own husbands. You know that a lot of people in the wedding ceremonies today ask that part to love and obey, that the obey part, there are people that will ask that part be deleted from their wedding ceremony. I don't know if you're aware of that. They want to remove that. And there's some people, I'll tell you, this women's lib movement that's been going on for decades has influenced the world, and I'm persuaded sometimes Christians, a lot more than we might be aware of. To bristle at just the text which says that they're to be obedient to their own husbands. A lot of times that just causes a defensive reaction, and that should not be the case. Remember what we started out with? That's part of sound doctrine. That's being called to your senses. That's that sense of responsibility. That's just what is right. That's sound doctrine. And so biblical respect for the biblical role of leadership is what that is talking about. And sometimes I'm reading people and they'll say, well, that was a cultural thing. Here's the thing about headship. Here's the thing about subjection. When those passages deal with that, it's never based on culture. It's based on creation. Adam was first born, then Eve. And so passages that talk about that, 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Timothy chapter 2, they base those arguments not on culture, but on creation. It goes back to the beginning. And that reflects God's will. And so, again, it's not a matter of competition. It's not a matter of fighting each other. It's the man loving his wife as Christ loved the church, Ephesians 5. Devin's going to talk about that tonight. I wasn't sure if he was or not. He'll have to now. And to cherish his wife. Isn't that a wonderful word? Two of my best friends. You'd know both their names. I mean, more than two. But two in particular have both made that point as they've lost their wives, that what they miss so much is having her to cherish her, and how lost and lonely they feel without that. And so you have that, to love her, to cherish her, as Christ does, his body, the church. But still, what the text says is what it says. And 1 Peter 3 says that's true even if your husband's not a Christian. That principle is still true. And then there's a purpose clause, that the word of God be not blasphemed. Professing Christians who are disobedient to God's will in the home, instead of attracting people to the Lord, cause the word of the Lord to be blasphemed. Well, let's determine that our home will be such that it will cause the word of God to be honored, that no one would ever be turned away because of our conduct in our home. We're called to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And in our home, let's let our light so shine as to glorify our Father who is in heaven. If you've not yet obeyed the gospel of Christ, you need to start there, so that Christ is in you and you are in him before you go further with anything else. And so we ask you to bring Christ, your broken life, so marred by sin. He will create anew, make whole again, as we stand and sing.